Greetings, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the ICO's Mocktails and Masterpiece. We've got a great program for you tonight. I'm delighted to be joined by the acting principal flute of the ICO. Alistair Howlett is with us. Thanks for joining us, Alistair. I hope you're doing well.
Doing very well. Thank you, Matthew. And thanks so much for having me today.
We're delighted. You've been such a remarkable addition to the orchestra, not only your phenomenal musicianship, but everyone loves you. The camaraderie of an orchestra is really the backbone of music making so much. And I feel very disappointed that, not only was our season essentially cut in half with cancellations because of COVID, but we were really robbed of the chance to continue to get to know your music making with us in this position, which you just only recently joined us. So if our patrons are joining us tonight, this is a great opportunity for them to get to hear you play, but additionally to get to know you a little bit better. So maybe you wouldn't mind just telling us briefly about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm originally from Sydney, Australia, and I moved to Indianapolis about 7 years ago, 2013. And the reason for that is that I ended up meeting my wife, Jennifer Kristen, who is the principal oboe of the Indianapolis Symphony, at a music festival in 2010. So from 2010 to 2013, Jen and I, we were long distance. We had a long distance relationship, and it was pretty long distance. It was initially Munich to New York. Jen was at the Juilliard School of Music, and I was finishing up my master's at the School of Music in Munich. And then I moved back to Sydney because I had a job there with the Opera Australia Orchestra. So we played a full season of operas and ballets at the iconic Sydney Opera House, which was a lot of fun. And then when Jen graduated from Juilliard, she went to Miami to be with the New World Symphony for a year. And then during that time, she won the audition in Indianapolis. And so, we were talking about hopefully one day, being in the same hemisphere at least to make our dating and just to make life a little bit easier. And so we talked a lot about it, and we just thought that Indianapolis would be the best for both of us. And so after about 18 months, I got my visa from the US government, which was very exciting to move here. We got married, and since then I've been living here in Indy for the last 7 years, and we now live in just south of Broad Ripple, and we have a little son, Elliot. He's going to be turning 2 in August, and he keeps us very, very busy.
Oh, and he's adorable too. I love these stories because the great music making is what has brought all of us into this field. The composers that we love, the music that we love to practice and perform for an audience, but it's the human stories that I'm always most particularly attracted to. For example, everything that you've just described. And how would you describe, if you can, succinctly, like starting in Australia and in Germany and in the Indianapolis, what has music opened for you in your life, the opportunities that it's given you?
Well, exactly that, to see the world, first and foremost. I mean, Australia, of course, with modern technology, flights, airplanes, the world is getting smaller and smaller. But I think especially in Australia, we feel very far away from the rest of the world. We're, quite isolated in a sense. And musically, maybe some ideas, they take a little bit of time perhaps to come to Australia. But I think these days it's not really much of an issue in terms of distance. But exactly, I had so many influences from my teacher about, especially going to Europe, studying there, to learn with some fabulous teachers. And for me, that was what I really wanted to do. And then I did a couple of music festivals that took me to Japan, that took me to Switzerland. And the one in Switzerland is where I met my wife. And now here I am in the US. And I never would have imagined it. I really thought that, I had my roots already in Australia, but now my sister lives in Tokyo, which is kind of crazy. Oh, wow. My mom's Japanese, so I'm half Japanese, half Australian, as is my sister. She kept up her Japanese, which I wish I did, but I didn't. It's very basic survival Japanese. But she's now married and expecting a baby in November, which is very exciting. And she's working for a space startup company in Tokyo. And it's just, we're all over the place. It's kind of amazing. But music has really brought, just the friendships also that I've made, the people I still keep in touch with, the people who mean so much to me. It's all through music. And of course, the music itself, coming together with a group of people, say anything from a small chamber group of 5 people, anything up to a big symphony of 90, 100 people. You just always have this feeling of working together, playing together, and doing it for each other. And it's just a wonderful feeling, you know.
That is very well said, and I couldn't agree more, especially the aspect of sitting down with somebody in a festival in particular that you've never played with, you barely know, and that you immediately know because of our tradition, what everybody's responsibility, what their role is. The organizational and institutional knowledge within any orchestra is exceedingly high. People just, the level of artistry these days, but these experiences, which you just so perfectly stated about visiting other cultures, and even if you don't speak the language, you can do music with somebody immediately here. So as you mentioned also that your wife Jennifer is the principal oboe of the Indianapolis Symphony. So as 2 musicians in a household now with Elliot is 2, I remember you saying.
Nearly
How
there.
did you adapt to this dramatic change in your lifestyle, which affected the entire world? But mid-March, all of a sudden, you're teaching at Anderson and DePaul, and you're performing with the ICO and other, the symphony as well, and other organizations. All of a sudden, you're at home, the 2 of you with a 2-year-old. And what was your life like, and how's it evolved since then?
Yeah, it took quite a sharp turn there suddenly, like a sudden U-turn. For the first couple of weeks, it wasn't too bad because daycare centers were still open. So, Elliot was still going to daycare. He loved it. He loved making friends. He loves playing. So we decided to keep him there. And we had a pretty decent schedule of getting quite a lot of practice done. And we had grand plans for the future, just in case, the season didn't go back. What were we going to do? So we had some ideas about streaming or recording some potential pieces. But then daycare centers closed, and we had to look after our little boy. And, that's obviously become the major priority. But in the meantime, we've actually set up a sort of 2-day schedule where we work in certain shifts. And so that gives one of us a bit of a break. And during his afternoon nap, generally I'll practice. And then when we put him down around 8:30 p.m. for the night, that's actually when Jen will do her practicing and reed making. And so we've actually set up we've worked it out well in terms of scheduling and still being able to practice. And we're still hoping to, do some driveway recitals or concerts where people can come and maybe just, socially distance safely and be able to watch us. So we're still hoping to have some plans in. I also had a plan of hopefully like recording some flute repertoire every week or 2. But yeah, that that didn't end up happening, which was too bad. But
you've got it better figured out than I do. I commend you, because I've got listeners might know a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they're always at my door here, just Dad, swing us. Let's go to the floor. I've got this stack of music that I was going to ambitiously study. Things that I've always wanted to learn, and it just hasn't happened. So I'm delighted. If you're just tuning in, I'm delighted to be joined by Alistair Howlett, our acting principal flute. As always, please chime in with some questions here. We need to hear Alistair play now. And Alistair, you've got a great segment that you've recorded for us by a prominent American composer who's written, over 150 works that are in the catalog now. Why don't you set this segment up for us, if you will?
Sure, thank you. So like I was saying before, we were trying to, make some projects happen for the summer. And so before the daycare shut, I had the ambition of recording some solo repertoire for the flute, hopefully getting through one piece in a week or 2. And so, of course, that was also to challenge myself, to keep myself motivated, and to learn some repertoire that I've never looked at before. And so I was looking at some music, and I came across this piece, Soliloquy by Lieberman. I was first introduced to Lieberman back when I was doing my bachelor's of music at the Sydney Conservatorium. I learnt his sonata for my final recital. His flute sonata is one of his most well-known works, and it's a fantastic piece. And I had his solo piece, Soliloquy, in my backlog, so I thought this would be a great time to learn it. So it was written in 1993. It's roughly 5 to 6 minutes, so it's not too long, but it does prove to have a lot of challenges. I believe he's a pianist primarily, but as a composer, he writes very, very well for flute. There are some difficult elements in this piece, especially a lot of large intervals that have to be played PP, so pianissimo, very, very softly, which can be very, very difficult. And then in the mid to later section, it gets quite fast and technically demanding. But like I said, yeah, and you said also, Matthew, that he's written a lot for flute. He's written a flute concerto, a flute and harp concerto, a piccolo concerto. He's written 2 trios for flute, cello, piano, and he's written sonatas for flute and guitar and flute and for harp. So he's got a wonderful range of flute music that we feel very lucky to have. And of course, he's still alive. He's still living. He's on faculty at the Mannes School of Music in New York. And in terms of his compositional style, it's quite traditional. Like I just said, he wrote a lot of concertos, sonatas, things that they were writing, forms they were writing back in the 1600s or so, maybe even earlier. But he really pushes tonality. So for example, a lot of his music is described as polytonal, meaning the use of 2 keys at the same time. So I was just wondering when this first sort of started, and I guess one of the earliest examples of polytonality can be found in Petrushka by Stravinsky. You'll see that he uses C major against F major, which creates a tritone, and this clash of these 2 keys is it doesn't sound so great. It's pretty horrible. If you'd like to visualize, C major on the piano is all the white keys, and F major on the piano is majority all the black keys. So if you want to go to a piano, play the white keys against the black keys, you're going to hear that clashing of the harmony. So I thought I might play just a little bit of the opening motif. We open with a very slow section. It starts with a D major triad. But after this D major triad, we come to a G sharp. And the D and the G sharp, that creates the tritone, the sort of ugly dissonance. And then he resolves to the F sharp. So that's the opening motif in the opening bar. You're going to hear this motif come back, and he's going to move it around, change it around, different registers. He'll increase the speed of it. It gets a lot more complicated. And so I would also just like to talk very briefly about how it's written structurally. It's not quite a traditional rondo form. A rondo form would be a A, B, A, C, A style. Here in soliloquy, we find a sort of A, B, C, A. So the opening section comes back at the end. So we have sort of this nice full circle in the composition. Sections A and B are quite slow, with a couple of fast passages sort of sprinkled in between. Section C is the very, very fast, demanding, technically difficult passage before we come back to the beginning section A. I didn't plan out too far ahead, so apologies in advance. I have a couple of page turns. I could have photocopied them and had it all spread out nicely, but we had a lack of stands in the house and a lack of space as well. But I thought the nice thing is that it's not quite exact, but basically every page, 4 pages of this piece represents each section. So when you see me turn the page, you'll actually kind of know, okay, we've moved from section A to B, and then the next time I turn the page, it's sort of the very end of section C back to A. So it should be visually also quite obvious when I go from section to section. And just very briefly, one last thing. At the very beginning of section B, we have another example of polytonality. We have a nice clash of B major and E flat major going against each other. And I hope you enjoy, as I did.
That's terrific. Any questions for Alistair, please let us know. Here's Lowell Lieberman's soliloquy. Apologies for that, everyone. We're going to restart the video, just a little bit of a glitch there. But again, here's Alistair with Lieberman's soliloquy. That was fantastic, Alistair. And I noticed the soccer jersey too, right? Any special significance there?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a little bit heartbroken at the time because I follow the football club Liverpool FC in England. And of course, all sporting leagues, everything had shut down. And we were 2 wins away from winning the league for the first time in 30 years. So I've been waiting around 20 years or so not as long as some people, but it's been a long, long time. First time that I can even remember. And I'm glad to say that on Saturday we clinched the title. So it was really, really nice. I had a good weekend. Yeah.
What an incredible performance too by a very important American composer. I mean, really, really brilliant playing. Just if there are any questions that continue to come through, we'll have one more opportunity after we have one short clip to show you. But before we get to that and before we set it up, I want to ask you about your experience sitting in the woodwind section of an orchestra, whether it's a chamber orchestra like the ICO or many of the very large orchestras that you played in. What's it like to be not only the principal flute of an orchestra, but a member of the woodwind section with instruments that are so distinct from one another, and timbres, and dealing with balancing and intonation, and just working as a team. This group that's centered right in the middle of an orchestra.
Oh, you basically hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'm probably a little biased here, but I think it's probably the most difficult section to play in, just because each voice is so different, timbre-wise, intonation-wise. I feel like it takes a lot of experience to really know, where to listen, who to listen to, and when to listen to. When you need to sort of, especially as a principal player, sometimes you really just kind of have to sit back a little bit, listen, and just blend into the section, and perhaps let another voice take over. Especially as principal flute, you're generally on top of the voicing. So a lot of flutists might feel like, well, everyone should listen to me coming down, but we should really try our best, I feel, to listen bottom up, listening really hard to the bassoons in most cases, and try to build up from there. But like you said, it can be difficult. Of course, my wife being an oboist, I have a lot of sympathy towards oboists, working with double reeds, bassoonists as well. And for clarinetists, of course, it's incredibly tough. I feel so lucky that I don't have to work with a reed. Very, very, very lucky. And I know how temperamental they can be and how tough it can be. And so I feel like it's really on the flute players to be as accommodating as possible as well, because we might have certain aspects that we don't have to worry about as much. And we have that flexibility built into the instrument. We have also such wonderful instruments. Originally they were made out of wood, didn't project very well. But, in the last 100 years or so, now they're made out of metal, silver, gold. They project all the way to the back of the hall. They're so easy to be flexible with, adjust with, tone-wise as well. I do love the fact that as a flute player, I get to sit right in the middle of the ensemble. I think I have the best seat in the house. I get to hear everything the strings have. I get to feel the brass behind me. I feel like I'm really in the center of the world, which is really exciting. In terms of the differences, perhaps, between playing with a chamber orchestra and a symphony orchestra, or down in the pit with the opera, having that smaller combination with the chamber orchestra, I just love. A lot of people will say it feels more like a chamber music setting, which of course I absolutely agree with. It's really nice to be able to go off on what you hear. So on what you're hearing, you're able to react to. Whereas sometimes in a large ensemble, like a symphony, again, maybe you have up to 80, 90 players, it's really hard to go off on what you're hearing, because sometimes by the time you hear something, you're going to be late. And so a lot of the times you have to go off a lot of visual cues. And so it takes a lot of different aspects, experiences, and, knowing when you need to play and how, and who to listen to and when. And it's part of the challenge that I love, and I miss very much right now.
Very well put. I don't even want to set up this next video now that I'm thinking about it. We're going back into the archives for this and tell you that the composer is Poulenc, one of the composers that I really appreciate very, very much. But we want to go to this next video and then come back and we'll chat with Alistair Howlett about it. You're going to love this. Here's, well, take it away. Oh, that was great. That's great. Our assistant concertmaster says, "Baby Alistair." I love it. In case you're wondering why the box was so small, we did everything we could on our end. That's VHS technology right there. That is obsolete technology. Alistair, do you recall, this performance? I mean, this is golden age stuff right here.
I actually remember this performance really well. It was the first time I played anything in public by memory, so I was completely terrified. I'm still scarred to this day. Yeah.
Oh, you were as cool as a cucumber. You even had some of the moves. Love it. It's a Poulenc Sonata. I mean, very, very well played. Obviously, a talent at a very, very young age. We did get a great question from a board member, Scott Putney of the ICO. Just curious about jazz in particular. Jazz. The first thing that pops in my mind, we were just joking about, was Ron Burgundy and Anchorman. I mean,
yes,
but have you ever had any experience outside of the notated page of classical music? Have you ever experimented with jazz or any other kind of music?
In terms of other kinds of music, not really. It's just there's already too much to do, too many things to learn, too much to practice. That one day I will. Jazz, yeah. Besides some jazz-inspired classical pieces, I haven't done much improvising or anything like that. At one time during school, I did have a guitarist I would play with, and I remember him encouraging me to play some jazz and just improvise every now and then. And he was great about it. He was very encouraging, but yeah, it didn't take off.
Honestly, it is such an incredible art form, jazz is. You get a classical violinist, you get them to improvise, and what you get is kind of a mix of awkward scales and just like really kind of choppy melodies. Like it is such a pristine art form, of the ability to improvise on a very structured harmonic progression. It's really phenomenal, and so I have great appreciation for our jazz colleagues. We're wrapping up this interview now. I just want to ask you if you have any thoughts about we're all so connected in this business now. Not only in the country, and since you have been with such international experience, you're talking to your colleagues in other countries. What does the fall look like for us? Do you have thoughts about what your teaching schedule is going to look like, and how optimistic you are about concerts resuming? All of this is changing, almost daily, if not weekly. What are your thoughts about going back to live performances?
I'm always optimistic. I'm always hopeful. I have to be. I feel like we're already such a creative group of people that in some ways we have to come up with solutions to this event that's just decimated the arts community. In terms of school, as far as I know right now, I believe most schools are going back with students on campus. The two schools I teach at, that's the plan as of right now. But we're sort of, keeping a mixed schedule of either some face-to-face tutoring or perhaps having to go back remotely. And I think a lot of semesters are going to be shortened and done more quickly, perhaps by Thanksgiving or something like that. I feel the ICO is in a wonderful position to meet this this virus situation head on really well. Is that naturally we're already such a smaller ensemble that already gives us, I think, great potential with being able to safely space out on stage, so we keep our colleagues safe. And I think the ICO, and also with the programming, is just so adventurous, so forward thinking, really looking towards the future. I'm actually really excited. I just recently saw the next season being announced. I looked at the programming. I think it's fantastic. I really, really, really hope it goes ahead. And I feel very confident that, the concerts will go ahead. I'm feeling good. We're in great hands with you, of course, Matthew, and the board and the directors and the team management. We're always thankful for what everyone does for us. And I just can't wait to getting back to playing with my friends, colleagues, and of course for the public.
Very well said, and I appreciate your statement on that. Of course, moving now our concerts from the Schrott, which is our home, into Clues, which used to be our home back in the 80s and the most of the 90s, so we can social distance our audience too. You're right. I think that we're in a very good position now because of our repertoire, the size of our orchestra, to adapt, and we are continually striving to adapt. And honestly, Alistair, I think you embody this, the teamwork and the high level of artistry of our orchestra perfectly. Coming to all of these challenges with the right mix of creativity and intelligence and flexibility. So I want to thank you for sharing a little bit of your time with us, and certainly your musicianship is most appreciated in this time where we can't perform and connected to our audience the way that we normally do. So thank you for joining us tonight. All the best to you and your wonderful family. We hope to be making music with you again very soon. Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Stay safe, everyone.